But I think it's time that we look back on all the arguments we've made and kind of take stock and sort of predict who's gonna win the election based on these arguments, right?
Definitely, I think so. So our goal now is to actually look at each of the segments that we covered and
Yeah.
determine if the other person who was listening to the argument was at all convinced by the particular model or idea that they had. And based on that, we're going to kind of make our prediction for this upcoming election. And that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons that we are airing this first episode so close to November 3rd, is because we want to have our say in predicting trying to predict who will
Yep.
become the next president.
Mm-hmm.
So
All
starting
right.
with your
So on
argument.
that note, let's look at the first argument. Uh, so the big question is really whether the argument is stronger that Trump is going to win, or whether you can tip it back over and bring that one key of scandal back to Biden's
Right,
side, right?
right. So the key point in Lichtman's model was can you remind me, international successes or international, no,
International success is minor compared to scandal, which he explicitly outlines
scandal,
what it
that's
needs to
right.
be.
So whether there was a scandal or there was not, I think we can judge whether there was a scandal just by how polarized the country, right? So
Yeah.
the scandal might occur on if a scandal is on a national level, then there's going to be a lot of people who dislike the current president. And
Mm-hmm.
according to the approval ratings, Trump has some of the lowest approval ratings than any president in the past half decade.
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue that we give that point to Biden.
Huh. So that's interesting. Would you consider the scandal to be bipartisan, because he does explicitly outline that?
Yeah, exactly. Because even in, say, Fox News polls, Trump has a lower approval rating than a disapproval rating. And
Yeah.
universally across almost all media sources, even ones that he are in the same party, they do show a higher rate of disapproval.
Yeah. But the big question is it bipartisan, right? And I think because there's some interesting things you can do in YouTube comment sections. Just scroll down, and if you look at, like, for example, Fox videos on the Trump impeachment, it's
Yeah,
all about how he's innocent, right?
yeah. But well, I mean, do you kind of agree with my point that we should give that point to Biden?
I think it's highly contentious, and I'm actually inclined to give it to Trump, because Lichtman even mentioned the Watergate scandal and said that it didn't go against Nixon because it was ongoing at the time, and so it looked partisan.
Okay, okay, that's yeah. So that shows it. So I think we just split the point in half, right? And
Yep.
that's going to be a tie there, right?
Yep.
So that way we kind of eliminate we have a certain prediction
Mm-hmm.
with the other 3 points.
Yep.
So with my point about poll quality, would you say that this means that polls are more of an accurate reflection than we think, even given that there might be some error on average?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think one big question to ask is, does 538 have any sort of maybe implicit bias, given that they are a polling agency themselves?
So they're not a polling agency. That's right. I want to
Oh.
clarify. They just collect and analyze the data from other polls. And so what I do appreciate about them is that they have all of their methodology explained outright, right? So they're
Yep.
not trying to hide anything. And so based on that,
Yeah.
it feels like they really have no stake in being biased towards one place or the other. And so they just
Uh-huh.
do what we're trying to do and give the most accurate prediction of the election.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, Nate Silverman, the guy who did 538, actually stopped certain polls to not influence voters, as we saw the third point. So yeah, I think I might say that even a little bit against my will, I would be convinced that the polls are, accurate to enough degree that they still correctly predict Biden, because we're talking 10 points versus 3, right?
Okay, so then that's a point for Biden at least as far as the things that we're discussing goes.
Yep.
So then let's talk about your bandwagon argument.
Uh-huh.
So what would that would we be mainly looking at the campaign at the ad campaigning, right, and the
Uh-huh.
independent voters.
Yeah.
So what's your verdict there? I mean,
Well, for me, I think there is something to consider is Trump's sort of notoriety. You know, he did beat Hillary, even though she far outspent him even more than Biden is outspending Trump.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, he's such a prominent figure in the media that there is a possibility that the advertising um, sort of point plays a smaller role, but
Hmm.
still, um, I'm gonna say like considering the numbers in a vacuum, we don't know how independents. I mean, like actually, I do know they split pretty evenly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If you look at Gallup's numbers, they split pretty evenly. So, is this the edge that could push independents over the edge? I'm actually not sure because again, we have the 3% margin of error by the polls, right?
Hmm.
And that's bigger than like the that's about the same as the little margin of error that we say is gonna push the independents over the edge. So I'm not sure. What about you? I want to see your
Yeah,
take.
so I think the main point that we can take away from this bandwagon effect is that at least this is my prediction is that states that voted Trump 4 years ago are going to vote Trump again in higher numbers. So
Okay.
based on my prediction and just looking at this bandwagon effect, um, you would have again more polarization, and so some of the states. I think that there's less likelihood that they will go over from Trump to Biden. So I think, for example, Texas is a prime example. It's becoming a swing state, and so I don't necessarily think that is true just based on what Texas has voted in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that is I would say it's a point for Trump just because Trump won the 2016 election. And so
Uh,
looking at the past, we can see, well, it definitely can change. You have that
yeah.
kind of historical basis.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I'm leaving it to you because I'm the one making the argument. So if you think it's for Trump, then we'll give it to Trump.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I'm convinced by the argument. So now to look at the last point, and so I think it's kind of related. It is basically the same thing of whether can we trust the polls, but this is specifically focused on the swing states. And the question is, does Trump have a chance in the swing states?
Uh huh.
And so I think Stephen Crowder's argument presented an interesting point, but I don't necessarily find that it's true given, again, the average systematic error over the elections cancels out.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Honestly, at this point, it's the big question of whether the numbers mean anything at all in that margin of error, right?
Mhm.
Um. But again, and correct me if I'm wrong. Biden is outpolling Trump in higher numbers than Hillary is.
That is true for most states, and
Yeah.
it's getting close in some states that are traditionally Republican, such as
Uh huh.
Georgia, I think.
Yeah. So you know, if Trump wins those states, then all that means is that polls have gone even worse, and you think they wouldn't want a repeat of what they did in 2016. So either this is all a grand conspiracy, or vote actually are leaning more towards Biden. So in this case, it's going to Biden. Yeah.
Well, I was, I'm not, I think so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because again, the only thing that I'm going off of here is that the average thing cancels out, the average bias canceled out over the years. And so
Uh-huh.
having such a significant bias towards the Democratic Party 2 years ago, that would be pretty significant as far as polling accuracy goes. And for
Uh-huh.
538's credibility as well as an institution.
Yeah, like I mean, like everything's gonna be going burning down if Trump wins. Like no one's going to trust anyone anymore. We're gonna have to like do a systematic rebuild of all the polling methodology.
I think either way, the upcoming election is going to be controversial, and no matter the result, there is going to
Yeah.
be a lot of people angry at either side.
Uh-huh.
And I think the main point to take away kind of from our first episode of the Partially Partisan podcast is that you don't necessarily have to be angry about things. And you can, while you can absolutely disagree with the other side, as we did a lot of times in this hour. There's definitely points where I did not agree at all with what David said, and I'm sure that happened on his side as well. Being more rational and collected about it rather than kind of invoking, getting too emotionally invested in it can actually be beneficial for discussing politics and kind of avoiding the very volatile situation that it's been coming to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's good to keep in mind that these studies, these reports, all of these things, these are the sum total of multiple people, and that's inherently going to be more representative of the general population than just your experiences. So it's always good to consider things that you can find more objective, and that try to take a broad view of things instead of just opinions.
Exactly. So keep in mind that's another type of bias that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point down the road, anecdotal bias and being more convinced by statistics rather than anecdotal evidence about your friends or family or someone you know. So I think in terms of the points that we've analyzed, the first one we said is inconclusive. The second one and the fourth one are towards Biden. And then the third one is towards Trump, which gives us a net prediction of 2-1 Biden to Trump. And so we are, again, this is not necessarily our opinion. This is just based on the arguments that we've analyzed. But it seems like Biden is more likely to win in this election than Trump, just looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're gonna.
Again, it would be. Yeah. Just as an addendum, like furthermore, we're trying to be as rational as possible. So this would just, whatever comes out, it would just, if Biden wins, then so does our rationality, and if Trump loses, if Trump wins, then everything goes haywire because we've been as rational as possible, and considering all things in the vacuum, we still think Biden's going to win.
Well, I think it's always important to keep in mind that there's the element of chance. So we're not even saying that somebody will win. We're just talking about probabilities, and we're saying that Biden has a slightly higher likelihood of winning than Trump. And to quantify that would be a whole nother story that we don't really have time to go into right now. But I definitely think that if we made any mistakes over the course of this podcast that you wanted to correct, then feel free to reach out to either me or David. We will provide our emails in the description, and as well as all of the sources that we use for this first episode of the Partially Partisan podcast. If you have any interest about learning more about those particular sources, we're going to share them down in the description as well. So is there anything else you wanted to say, David, before we close out for tonight?
Not really. Just please talk to everyone you know about these things. If you want to share or comment or whatever, that would just contribute to the discussion. That would also be pretty great. And other than that, I think that wraps it all up. Yeah.
Definitely. So I think as a closing note, if you have not voted yet, you should go out and vote. There's a couple of days left, and this is a pretty big election that decides the history of America in a sense. So no matter who your preferred candidate is, just go out and vote. And I think that's going to be it for the first episode of the Partially Partisan podcast, where I can repeat our mission, which is to approach controversial political topics, encourage political discourse, and dissect partisan arguments in a nonpartisan manner. Good night, y'all.
The end.